So I'm going to start all over because we're recording and broadcasting. So, good evening. That didn't sound real sincere. And if you're not sincere, then I'm insecure, and then you're here till 10 o'clock because I fumble over my words. All right. Good evening. How you doing? I never ever say how you doing. I mean, what does that even mean? You. All right. So welcome to the 2023 Adirondack Christian Fellowship Passover. I'm Rick Cohen. This is my wife, Gail. For those who don't know us, we're your hosts. And the Passover is a beautiful ceremony that we're going to explain from the beginning to the end and participate in. And I'll explain the elements on the table and how we're going to do it in just a minute. But I think the first thing that you need to do is learn Hebrew. So you're going to learn some Hebrew, but I'm going to give you the Hebrew, the only Hebrew you'll ever need to know. All right, you ready? So you repeat after me. Ani lo medaber ivrit. Ani lo medaber ivrit. Now all together, ani lo medaber ivrit. Ani lo medaber, which means I do not speak Hebrew. So you're all set. You can go to Israel. You got it fixed. All right. Father, we pray you would bless this evening and that you would be in the midst of our time together. For Jesus, our Passover is sacrificed for us. And for those who haven't seen that in the Passover or have never been to a Passover, would you just open all of our eyes to see the wonder of your love and grace in Jesus' name. Amen. So obviously you're in a church, and I'm a Christian pastor who was raised Jewish, loves my people and loves our history as many others do, but also love the fact that the Bible is very clear that the law was a shadow of good things to come, and those things are in Jesus Christ. I mean, we have a man named Abraham called out by God. From one man, we get a family, a clan. From that clan, we get a nation, but a nation that God ordained to be set in captivity 400 years, that they might come out with a mighty outstretched arm of God, to become the people of God for all the world to know, to end up in the land of Canaan, the land called later Israel, to be a light and a witness, and above all else, that light would be the bringing of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. So without apology, I try to bring out, and can't help but bring out, Christ in the Passover. Frankly, even if I did not speak about some things, you'd see it anyway, without me talking. But for me not to talk would be another miracle. So what we're going to do is touch, taste, see, smell, and hear in a ceremonial meal for about an hour. And I'll be bringing out some things of the New Testament understanding, and I'll be being a pastor a little bit in this too. But we'll also do exactly the Passover as closely as to when I was growing up. A Passover that's been kept similarly for thousands of years. Now it's 3,500 years back to the Exodus, and Exodus chapter 12. And in Exodus chapter 12, we have the story of, you shall now have a beginning of years for you, a beginning of months for you. It was on the 10th day of this month, called Nisan by God. Up until the 14th day of the month, they were to take a lamb of 1 to 2 years. The lamb was to be pure, without blemish, and kept and inspected. And then on the 14th day of that month, it was to be slaughtered. Its blood was to be put on the lintel and the doorposts of the house. They were to eat the lamb roasted whole on a spit, not breaking a bone of its body. And they were to eat it with bitter herbs and with unleavened bread. The lamb is mentioned no less than 27 times in Exodus chapter 12. And bitter herbs and matzah, or unleavened bread, are the elements. Well, there's a whole lot more to the Passover. That's because as the Jews progressed through history, and even as God allowed them to be chased out of their land for disobedience and struggle, they decided to add to the Passover different traditions and different actions to try to help them remember and commemorate that Passover. So did God ordain every one of these things that we'll do tonight? Not necessarily, but you will see beauty in this and blessing. So when we do things, you'll wait and be instructed in how to do it, and we'll wait for you and do it together, and I'll explain all those things to you. The other thing was that I didn't mention is, of course, the rest of the story is God said the angel of death will be passing over the land of Egypt, the 10th plague. And when the angel of death comes over and when I see the blood on your houses, then I will pass over the angel of death, and no one in your house will die, but the firstborn of all Egypt will die. And it was that broke the Egyptians and allowed Israel to go free from their slavery. So what we have in front of us, yours is blue, Gail and mine are white, just because we picked our ones out of our former. We've done 8 of these this year. So this is number 8, and everyone's joy. It's called the Passover Haggadah. This is a reduced version of a booklet that would have lots of extra information that would take 3 hours to go through. So as I tell everybody, I grew up as a kid, with all my uncles there smoking cigars, tight room, a lot of heavy-duty smells. You're getting off easy because it's a lot shorter, but yet it'll be fully embracing Passover. So the first thing that happens in this Haggadah is the telling of the story. The word Seder is order. So in a Passover Seder, we have a Seder plate, we have a matzah bag, we have candles to be lit, we have wine to drink, which is grape juice for us, and we have a pitcher and a bowl. The Passover begins like this. During that time, the house is thoroughly cleaned, but not only cleaned in white linen everywhere and white plates and etc., but the house is purged or freed from leaven, any kind of yeast in the house. As an introductory to Passover, all the leaven is burned in the fire. Because it's the second of the high holidays of Israel, of the 7 feasts of Israel, I should say. It's Passover with the Feast of Unleavened Bread that begin together, and then for 7 days subsequent, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, no leaven in your house. But usually there'll be a patriarch in the family, and if he's very orthodox, he may be wearing not just a tallis, a prayer shawl, which I don't cumbersome myself because I trip and stumble and knock things over. It's pretty ugly, so it's already ugly, but it's uglier. Okay, so this is what you get. So from me, and we're not under that law. But they wear, in an Orthodox home, starting about the 11th or 12th century, an Orthodox Jew would wear what's called a kittel, a one-piece linen tunic pulled over with maybe some buttons down to about here. And he would come out with a feather or a duster and a spoon, and Mom and the kids have left a little bit of leaven from what they've burned, just a little few crumbs somewhere maybe on the mantle or on a table somewhere, where Papa, Granddad, whoever is in charge can find it. He looks around, he finds the leaven, he scoops it onto the spoon, he takes it over to the fireplace, blows it into the fire, and thus we have the purging of leaven. Now in the Bible, obviously in the Old Testament, the leaven was because it's called the bread of affliction when they eat matzah, because their life was so hard and their exit was hurried and they could not put leaven in their bread. They could not put yeast in to raise it. They had to take off and take it flat. But there's more to that story, others in the Old Testament that I won't go into, that show that leaven is sin, and certainly in the New Testament we see that leaven is sin. And in 1 Corinthians 5 it tells us we're to keep the feast without the leaven of impurity of heart, of malice and wickedness, but with the love of Christ. And I'm paraphrasing that section. But there's more to the story, because you see, Jesus came in on that 10th day of Nisan, what we celebrated as Palm Sunday last week. And he rode into Jerusalem, Hosanna, Hosanna. He got off the donkey. He went up into the temple courts and looked around. He went out to the town that he was staying in, and then that next morning he came back in, and he did not take a feather and a spoon to purge the leaven. What did he do? He took a whip that he made, and he went into the temple courts where they were money exchangers and lamb and animal sales were happening, that was cheating and abusing the people. And you know what he did? He chased them out, and he said, "It is written, my Father's house will be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." I would submit to you that Jesus was purging the leaven, just as we did ceremonially here. He's the real deal, doing the real thing. Number 2, we have the lighting of the candles, and Gail's going to do that for you. And I didn't think about this, but since we're recording, I'm going to give you this. this.
Why don't you hold it for me?
Hold what? I am.
Oh, okay.
That's why I wasn't handing.
So a lady in front of a candlestick needs to stand up. You can move the candles in front of a lady if
We
there's
need
nobody.
at every table a lady to stand and go for it. It's okay, don't worry about it.
A fire's okay.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean that. I meant that. Then,
So
yeah,
we're gonna light them all together. First, we're gonna say a prayer in Hebrew. You'll repeat after me, and then we'll say it in English all together, and then we'll light the candles. Okay? So under number 2, just repeat after me. Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch atah Adonai,
Eloheinu melech ha'olam,
Eloheinu melech haolam,
asher kiddushanu,
asher kiddushanu,
b'mitzvot
mitzvotav,
v'tzivanu,
v'tzivanu,
shel yom tov.
shel yom tov.
Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us by giving thy commandments and instructed us to light the festival lights. So go ahead and light. And after you've lit the candles, if you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, we just want to kind of bring that, embrace that light and just bring it into yourself. Do a couple of swipes. Millie's having trouble.
There we go. And after you've done that, you can have a seat, ladies. So on the Sabbath, of course, the Jewish people welcome the Sabbath, and the rabbis say in the Talmud that the Sabbath comes in like a beautiful bride as the sunset comes. And the lighting of the candles, there are 2 candles, one to represent the light of blessing of the Sabbath and the rest, and the other candle to represent the strength of the law and obedience that is needed, the negative things like don't do this on the Sabbath. There's a couple of different theories. A lot of these things do not have an origin that we can say this is exactly what it means and exactly where it came from. It's hundreds and thousands of years old, but of course it's the beautiful thing is that Eve was the mother of all living, so the woman lights the candles in Judaism, and of course we just fast forward to Mary, who brought the light of the world. Something I intended to mention to you, well, I'll just bring that up a little bit later. So as we do these things, there are 4 cups of wine that we participate in by taking 1 sip to represent each cup, so we won't be filling your cups. That's your 4 cups right there. And so it's not that we're cheap, it's just the confusion that would take. And then you'd have to get up and use the restroom. So anyway, the point is it's 4 cups of wine from the 4 I wills of Exodus chapter 6, verse 6, where God said, I will deliver you from the yoke of bondage. I will free you from being slaves. I will redeem you with a mighty and outstretched arm, and I will make unto you a people to glorify my name. 4 different cups. And the first cup, the Kaddish, the blessing over it, is the cup of sanctification, setting apart for the Lord. I'll deliver you from the yoke of bondage. Lift your cup with me and repeat after me, and then we'll say it in English together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Peri Hagafen, which is, blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. Set apart for God. Well, the setting apart process in a Passover continues before we get into the rest of the meal. And that's where the head of the household takes, whether he's wearing a kittle with big sleeves or not, or whatever, he comes over to a bowl and a pitcher and a towel, and he does a ceremonial cleansing. You know, the Jewish people did many ceremonial cleansings, and the one that was being done even at that time was probably a lot like this, pouring the water over the tip of the finger, down the elbow. And he's saying, and there's a beauty to this, saying, God, I have cleansed myself and prepared myself to lead this Passover. And I am ceremonially cleansing myself to state that I am ready to lead because it's such a rare and honored privilege to do so. And a tradition of any kind can be a beautiful thing, yes? And it can mean a lot to a person with a sincere heart. And there have been many through history, many Jewish ceremonies are by people with sincere hearts. On the other hand, at the time of Jesus, the religious leaders, they said to him, "Why do your disciples eat with unwashed hands?" They weren't saying, "We notice there's dirt under their fingernails." They were saying, "Why don't your disciples do all these ceremonial cleansings we do?" And if you know about the Pharisees and the journey that would happen at that time, they were being very separate from people, not because they were more holy or pure, but because they thought of themselves as more holy and pure, and that they were above the people. We are the separated ones. We are holy, you aren't. And we do all these things. And Jesus said to them, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You make clean the outside, but not the inside's full of ravening wolves and wrongness." You know, you're in big trouble with this. You're setting yourself up above others. So that ceremony could be misleading if the person doing it has not a right heart. And let's not just be on the Pharisees. It's easy to pick on them. But Jesus had 12 disciples. And if you want to notice, when you read the Gospels, the biggest conversation that happened that we see among Jesus and his disciples, he talked about a lot of things. But when he corrected them, it was for what? Saying, "I am the greatest. No, I am the greatest. No, I should sit on his right hand, my brother on his left hand." They were constantly arguing about which of them was the greatest. They had the same mental issue because humans are humans. You know, when we talk about the Jewish people and their failing of any kind, we are not belittling Jewish people or their history. We're just being honest. And the other thing is, it wouldn't have mattered if it was Abraham and the Jews, or if it was Luigi and the Italians, or it was Sven and the Swedes. It would be the exact same story. And if we didn't get your group in, they're included. Pete and the Poles, how's that? Which guy? So everybody's human, and everybody has a tendency to put themselves above others, or else put themselves down unnecessarily. But to be right in God's eyes. So Jesus, what did he do? After the supper, he took that towel, he took that bowl, he took that pitcher. He did something remarkable. He did what the lowest slave in the house, or servant in a house, or child in a house would have to do to help others, is to wash the disciples' feet. And it says that he took off his outer garment and wrapped a towel around his waist. Was Jesus wearing a kittle? Well, as I said, the kittle may not have come into play in that name for it until the 11th or 12th century AD. However, in Leviticus 16, when you see the high priest, what he wears to go into the holiest place of all on the Day of Atonement, the only time he goes beyond the second curtain into where the Ark of the Covenant is, he was to wear a white linen tunic and none of the other garb that a priest would have on him. My friends, whether it was called a kittle or not, I don't know. Probably not. But it's very interesting to me. We know what Jesus was wearing. Because when he was at the cross and they were crucifying the three men, Jesus in the middle of the two criminals, they were tearing their garments into pieces to give cloth as payment to the soldiers. But when they came to Jesus, it said he had a one-piece linen tunic that was valuable. And they said, "Don't tear it, let's do what? Cast lots for it," which fulfilled Old Testament prophecy. So, the urchatz, the washing. Next, I know you're hungry. On your plate is parsley. I want everybody to get a piece of parsley on your little plate. And you can pass just this, you can just, however you want to get the parsley around if you're not comfortable throwing it at people. And then you're going to take a peek at me for a minute. You're going to dip in the salt water and put it on your plate and wait for everybody else. That salt water in the center of your plate And we'll dip that. And again, there's a prayer prayed over this. It's a touch, taste, see, smell, hear kind of deal. So we'll see how this taste feels for you. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri ha'adamah, borei peri ha'adamah, which is, blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the produce of the earth. Now savor that flavor before you get a drink. I'll have to get one to talk. So, the salt water wasn't too salty, but the salt water represents the tears that the people shed as slaves in Egypt, the sweat of their brow that they worked under day after day after year after century. Pretty big oppressive deal. But it also speaks of something wonderful. I bet some of you know the parting of the Red Sea. Yeah, you can jump in when I do that, you know. I won't shout at you or send you to the principal's office. So the parting of the Red Sea, it was salt water, the salt sea, and it was separated. And God, the Egyptians that you see, you will never see again. So there was a beauty to it. And the parsley does not have to be parsley. The elements have to be bitter herbs of any kind. It would be a green leafy one they would use for this because it would also represent the hyssop branch that they were instructed to use to dip in the blood of that animal to put on the lintel and the doorposts of the house. So green, springtime, new life and new hope, also remembering from where they came, which continues. And right now we have what's called the Man Ishtana, or the 4 questions, and we have a young man that's going to stand and read those 4 questions to us. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. So those questions we're going to answer in a few minutes. You know, why do we eat matzah on this night? We don't always have to eat matzah, but we have to tonight. Why do we eat bitter herbs instead of any kind of herb, sweet or bitter? Why do we dip not once but twice when we could not dip at all other nights? Why do we eat reclining instead of sitting upright? And we'll answer those in a minute. But it's a beautiful thing that happens because in a Jewish family, the youngest child who's able to starts out by being the one to ask the questions. Then as they age out and another kid comes behind them, then that kid is the youngest that's able to recite it, either by learning to read it or just by being recited to him or her so they can speak it. So you go through all the kids in the family, and every single child in a family asks their parents and grandpa and grandma if they're there, why do we do what we do? And as I always say, I think it's a beautiful thing because if you can't explain to your children why you do what you do, you should either stop doing it or find out why you do it, decide that you do it because you actually believe you should do it. But not just doing things because they're traditions. Now, the Jewish people, like anybody else, can fall into that tradition without purpose. It can happen to anybody, but it's a beautiful, beautiful thing they're giving. Now, I was the youngest in my family, so once it hit me in my immediate family, I was the one. On top of that, we gathered with all the cousins and everybody, and guess what? I was still the youngest. So once it hit me, it was me all the way for many years. But this is how you had to do it in my house. You had to sing it, cantor it. And if you go online and listen to a modern Jewish Seder with a young person, they will do a really cool new style. But I'm going to give you the style from 1962. Are you ready? And probably a lot of history before that. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot. Shabakal haleilot on achlin chametzu matzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah. Shabakal haleilot on achlin shir yaakot halayla hazeh maror. Shabakal haleilot ein anu bat milu afilu pa'am echat halayla hazeh shtei famim. Shabachal halaylot anu oklin bein yoshuvenu bein mitzubin halayla hazeh kulanu mitzubin. No idea really if I did it right, do you? Okay. I think I messed up one little word there, those quick things, but I do that in English as well. At any rate, those questions answered are beautiful and meaningful. Why do we eat only matzah? We've kind of covered it. It's the bread of affliction. We're gonna celebrate it in a few minutes. The hurried exit is the Jewish answer, and that's the soul answer. The second question is, why do we have to eat bitter herbs? Because we have to remember the bitterness of our slavery. And we're going to do some more memory, remembering the bitterness of slavery. When we do it again later, you and I, let's remember this, that these people who came out of Egypt, it didn't take them long after all those miracles and the mighty deliverance of God that was undeniable God. But once they got out into the wilderness and suffered a little bit of setback or trouble or like no water for a little while or not wanting the food they really wanted, not getting it, they said, would to God we had died in Egypt, where we had leeks and onions and sat by the flesh pots. It must have been a real picnic there with Pharaoh. You know, it's funny how your memory of how it used to be, the good old days, can be tainted by struggles of what you're going through. And God did not promise us that walking with him meant that we'd have a rose garden and everything would be wonderful. But you know, your life without God, you may forget what it was like to be a slave to sin. Someone has been around as long as I have could easily forget and think it's just all about me and not the grace and the mercy of God. Remember from where you came. But then the dipping twice, why do we dip twice? Once is to remember that slavery and bitterness, but another, you'll see a little bit later, is to remember the hope and the promise of the promised land. Additionally, the last question is, why do we eat reclining tonight? And they say, because we were slaves and now we're free men. It's going to be spoken again in another spot. But the funny thing is that God didn't say in Exodus chapter 12, you're to eat reclining and relaxing like that. You're supposed to eat with your robe pulled up into your belt like you're ready to go hike, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. This is really more the look. I'm holding a staff. I'm ready to go. I'm eating like this. At any time, God could say, let's go. Let's go. Are you ready to go? And so I think you could combine the beauty of what they're saying that we're now at rest, because I find this to be true, and I'll give them credit here. When I'm at rest with God, I'm ready to stay where he has me, and I'm ready to go if he takes me. So I can be at rest because that makes me ready to go, and I can be ready to go because that puts me at rest with being here. So my statement is, to be ready to go is to be ready to stay. And to be ready to stay is to be ready to go. Are you ready if Jesus came for you tonight? If you're not, you're actually not ready to stay either, because you're confused. But if you're ready to go tonight, you're also ready to stay till he calls you. You think about it. You don't have to agree with me. And I won't say, but you can be wrong. I'll say, you just don't have to agree with me, but would you think about it? Are you ready to stay, and are you ready to go? So that's the Manish Tana. Next, we have what's called the unity bread. I need a man at each table near the bread, the matzah bag. Yours is blue or gold or white, excuse me. There's a bag on a plate. You need to lift the whole thing up. Well, actually, you don't lift the whole thing up. I always say that. Take the bag. I need a guy to stand at each table. Jump up, guys. Let's do it. I mean, it depends. So the peer pressure is people want to eat, so they want you to hurry up. So, all right, so you want to find the middle matzah. There's 3 compartments. This is called the matzah tosh, which just means bag, and it's also called the unity matzah, 3 in 1. You need to take, I've got a crack here. You need to take the middle matzah out, set the bag down. Now this is Jewish. This isn't a Christian addition to the Passover. This is amazing. You take out the middle matzah, set the bag down, hold the matzah with the matzah facing the lines going out from your body so you can break it in half as close as you can to the center. I'm going to wrap the smaller half, if there is a smaller one, in what's called the afikomen, it's called, and it's going to be wrapped in your napkin. Look at what I did with my napkin. Just unfolded it, one unfold. Look what I'm doing here. This is the Jewish Passover Seder, wrapping the afikomen in white linen. And we'll explain this after dinner in our last 15-minute section after we eat our food. Set it aside. All right, now you're going to lift up that whole matzah plate, and we're going to recite the Magid, the telling. Everybody ready to read with me? This is which our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. All who are hungry, let them come in and eat. All who are needy, let them come in and celebrate the Passover. Now are we here. Next year may we be in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year may we be free men. And you may put down the Passover matzah tash. Now, interesting thing here. Interesting. Now are we slaves? Next year may we be free men. They're not referring back to the night of the Passover on that. They're talking about Jews worldwide, that unless all Jews are free, no Jew is free. That is a beautiful sentiment. To say we care about our brethren wherever they are. All of my family came from Russia, Russian Jews who were oppressed there. That Fiddler on the Roof is the story of my family. And so I like it for 2 reasons, just because it's great, and also because it's a real story that my grandmother couldn't watch it because she would think about her memories of persecution. It wasn't an easy thing for her. So the Jews have been persecuted through history and struggled, and their thought is if one Jew is not free, no Jew is free. And I think we as the church can say this, that we should look towards the persecuted church with the same heart of love and care for them. And that's why we try to pray for them as often as possible. We do miss a Sunday here and there, but we try to pray for the persecuted church in earnest every week. So, next, we're going to have 4 readers. They're going to get up one by one, starting with, of course, number 1, and read us a little bit of the story. And that's just part of the telling of the story before we take a piece of matzah.
The Lord had promised the land of Israel to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yet here were their children in Egypt. The Pharaoh who had come to power feared them. These foreigners in our midst are prospering and have grown numerous, he thought. Suppose they join with our enemies and turn against us. Pharaoh decided to exert greater control over this people, imposing harsh and bitter slavery upon the Israelites. Still, God blessed his people in strength and number.
Pharaoh grew more frightened and ordered every baby boy among the Israelites to be drowned in the Nile River. One Israelite couple hid their little boy for 3 months. Finally, entrusting his future to God, they set him in a basket and placed him upon the river. His sister Miriam watched as he floated downstream. Coming upon the basket, Pharaoh's daughter took pity on the child and chose to raise him as her own son. She called him Moses, meaning drawn from the water.
Moses grew and became aware of the travail of his people. One day, in a rage, he lost control of himself and killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew slave. Fleeing the palace and the eye of Pharaoh, Moses became a shepherd in the land of Midian, far from the cries of the suffering
children of Israel, and hearing their groaning, he raised up a deliverer to lead them out of bondage. It was then that he appeared to Moses in the midst of a bush that burned with fire, yet was not consumed. Moses drew close and listened as God commissioned him to go to Pharaoh. Fearful and reluctant, still Moses agreed to bring God's message to the king of Egypt. Let my people go.
Let my people go. And what it would take to let those people go. So many parts to this story, so many fascinating parts to the story, and we haven't read or discussed them all, and we won't tonight. You can get yourself a Haggadah. You can read Exodus, and I hope you have. There's so much to the story, but just imagine a man so arrogant that he thinks that he can enslave people. It happens all the time, not just by one man or one country. It's happened through history. Enslaving them so that they could not grow further and perhaps be with the enemies against him. And yet what happened when he enslaved them? They just mass-produced more. They expanded. And then he goes, well, then I have to just kill the male children. Imagine. Kill the male babies. Take them and drown them in the Nile. But, here's I think of Yul Brynner. Just... I'm in charge, large and in charge. I'm a god. All the plagues that happened to Egypt were direct assaults on their false gods. God was tearing down Egypt just the way he allowed them to get built up step by step, and also proving that their gods were simply idols. Pharaoh really himself being one of them. And here's a man that thought he could drown baby boys in the Nile River, and instead God gave it to Moses' parents to place their baby in that very same water, would take him downstream right into Pharaoh's daughter's arms. She would carry him and have a compassion for him. And right under Pharaoh's nose, the deliverer that God would use to bring Israel out of his oppression would grow up. And as I love to say, he paid for his Nike or Reebok tennis shoes. Pharaoh paid for his dental work and his braces. Pharaoh paid for his college education. What I'm saying is, just when it looks like Satan or the world in sin is in control, and we think God is not anywhere to be found, he's not in control, you might be wrong. You might not see everything because you're in the middle of a tunnel and all you can see is what's in front of you in that tunnel. And granted, there are some pretty long, difficult tunnels, let's be honest. But the bottom line is God has never abdicated his throne. And in your life, in my life, or in the life of a nation or nations, God is in control and he is accomplishing his purpose. The beautiful story of the Passover. Well, next we take each one a piece of the matzah that's on top of, you were setting aside your matzah afikomen to leave it alone, but the one on top of your matzah bag, you can take a little piece off for each one of you. Everyone gets a piece to take a matzah ceremonial piece. And if you ever, as we go through this, if you need more matzah, you take the top one inside the matzah bag. As you're breaking those off, listen to me. Why is it called the 3-in-1? Why is there 3 matzahs in one and the middle one taken out and broken and half of it wrapped in white linen? According to the Jewish people, the answer is we're not sure. It really is. I'm not mocking. I'm just saying we think it could represent the priests, the Levites, and the congregation, the 3-in-1. It could represent Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And there's a mystery around the afikomen that will unravel after the dinner, the actual meal that we eat tonight. But this is called the bread of affliction. And their struggles, there's much more discussion about the struggles of the Jewish people through history and in the Passover, but I think you've gotten the point, and this is the way we focus. So let's take the matzah and repeat after me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, which is, blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread out of the earth. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to have the cup of plagues. It was the plagues, culminating with the 10th plague, that would deliver Egypt. I will free you from being slaves. You're going to take that cup and put it right on your little plate, because you're not going to drink it. You're going to use your right hand little pinky. Pardon me. How do I do this? Everybody's brains out, ears out, excuse me. Not your brains, your ears. We're going to dip once, and I'm going to call out each plague, and you're going to call it out after me, and then you drop that drop on your plate. And when you're done, you take your little pinky and you wipe it with your napkin so you don't put any of it to your mouth. The Jews say it was a great deliverance, but it came at a great cost. And we will not drink this cup. We will pour it out to the Lord, because they weren't sitting there, and this is beautiful. We are not in hatred of our enemies. And of course, even God in the Old Testament, there were things that you would think are just about revenge and stuff like that from the way you read certain sections, but actually God was showing his love and his kindness to people, and that would be a long story to explain. We won't do it tonight, but beautifully the Jewish people have taken that heart and saying we will have compassion on our enemies, and Jesus said, love your enemies. So we know where we should go. To the cup of plagues. Repeat after me. Blood.
Blood,
Frogs.
frogs,
Lice.
lice,
Flies.
flies,
Blight.
blight,
Boils.
boils,
Hail.
hail,
Locusts.
locust,
Darkness.
darkness,
Slaying of the firstborn.
slain of the firstborn.
Do you know if Pharaoh had received the miracle of the blood and accepted the fact when Moses stretched out his staff and God turned all of the waters of Egypt to blood, he would have been saved from all the rest of his horrible fate by believing the work of the blood. But it was not to be. It was to be the death of the firstborn of all Egypt. So the cup of plagues, the children of Israel have a song they sing at this point called Dayenu, which means it would have been enough or it would have been sufficient. It's a compound word. And had he brought us out from Egypt and not carried us out the judgments on the Egyptians, it would have been sufficient. Had he carried out the judgments and taken us out into the wilderness but not fed us with manna, it would have been sufficient. Had he fed us with manna and not given us water from the rock, it would have been sufficient. It would have been sufficient. It would have been sufficient. Anything he did, what they're saying is more than they deserved. Everything he did was more than they had earned or deserved. Their promises of a deliverer was not based on their character. It was based on a promise to their forefather of God showing his glory and his kindness. That kindness has been shown to us in the fulfillment of all of this through Jesus. And I would submit to you that if your Christianity, if you're a Christian, and your thought is, if God would just do this next thing for me, and then I'll really trust him, really love him, and really be at peace with him, if he just would do this next thing, I would submit to you that you're misguided and you're just plain wrong. Because what happens is that thing happens, and then there's a next thing. That's how life works. And I'm not belittling anyone who's in a trouble and a pickle and wishes God would come through for them. You have a right to want God to touch you and do miracles for you. It's fine. It's just that if you and I are not going to have joy in our life, unless it's the next thing God does, we'll never have joy in our life. That is not the source of joy. Source of joy is knowing that what he already did for you is what you really needed. The price that he paid for you, and we'll get into that more later, but Dayenu, it was sufficient. Next we have, my goodness, we're moving pretty good. And we have the bitter herbs that we're going to eat. Break off a piece of matzah, and you're going to take some of this beautiful, freshly ground by Mark and Shannon. They ground fresh horseradish, and it's really good. It's kind of sweet and bitter. It's a little strong, but if you're a real Christian, you'll load up. No. Prove your manhood, prove your womanhood, prove your Christian faith. I probably am going to kill over here by talking like that. It's really good, but it is strong. When everybody has theirs, we'll say the prayer together. Why do we dip not once but twice? We dip to remember the bitterness of our slavery. We dip to remember from where we came. We had a harsh taskmaster. We were under great oppression, and God has delivered us. But we must remember, and they remember it as God instructed them with their taste buds. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu, bidavaro vitzivanu, al achilat maror, which is, blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us concerning the eating of bitter herbs. Good stuff. Mark said he already had his river of tears as he was grinding this stuff. So that remembering is so important, and there's so much more to that story, and I want to share a little bit with you, and we're doing great for time. We have one more thing to do, but this is an important thing that I just need to share with you. Jesus celebrated Passover every year of his life. I never thought about it till I was in the middle of doing these 8 Passovers this year. Never thought about it. What was it like for him, for instance, the first 2 years with his disciples doing Passover? What was he thinking about? Because he didn't describe it the way he does at the Last Supper. He waited till the Last Supper, the last Passover, to do it. Because every year he would take the bitter herbs. And he would know, even when he was younger. Yeah, he'd look at those bitter herbs, and I wonder if he'd say, I'm going to have a guy named Judas in my life. And you know, at the Last Supper, he said to all of his disciples, all of you will forsake me this night. And they all said, no, not me, not me. And especially Peter piped up the most, you know, even if all of these bums, he didn't say that, but you get that feeling. Even if all of these guys fail you, I won't. And that's when Jesus said, Peter, before the rooster crows, you'll deny that you knew me 3 times. No, Lord, I'll die with you. Well, he restored Peter, and he knew that would happen with Peter. But he knew something else. He said, one of you will betray me this night. Betray me. And they all went, well, who is it? Is it I? Is it me? Is it? And they were a little bit more humbled in this moment, it seems. But he wasn't saying, not until Peter across the table, we think, and John's next to him and Judas is next to him in the seat of honor. And Peter goes, John, ask him. It says he motioned to John, ask him. John said, oh, Lord, who is it? And Jesus said, he who now dips with me in the sop, you know, King James, in the bowl, in the stuff, in the bitter herbs, because that's what they were eating, bitter herbs. He who dips with me is he who betrays me. And at that moment, Judas dipped at the same moment with Jesus. Now, I've shared this before, but there are people that need to hear this maybe for the first time, or maybe for the first time that it comes into your heart. I have not been through what everybody's been through. I'm not going to sit here like an expert on your pain. I have no idea. what other people have been through. I only know there's one person who does, for sure. And I know that some of us have been betrayed. Some have been betrayed by the most important relationships: a husband, a wife, a parent, a child, a teacher, a best friend, a business partner. There's all kinds of ways to suffer betrayal, isn't there? And it is a very, very bitter thing. But there's a difference between what you've been through in suffering your bitterness of betrayal by someone else and what Jesus went through. And it's very simply this: if you and I had known what was going to happen, what that person was going to do, we would never have entered into that dipping with them. We would not have joined with them. We would have, no way, Jose, I'm going to protect myself. I know what's coming. I'm not going down that road. Come on. We would never do it. Jesus willingly, purposefully chose Judas. Jesus willingly, purposefully took that bitterness of betrayal. And you know in your deepest heart that he didn't just take his own betrayal there. His betrayal was for your sake and my sake. And let me add, I haven't felt a horrible pain of being betrayed as much as I have felt the bitterness of my own failure. Now, I haven't cheated on my wife. Don't try to figure out what I've done. But I have failed people in my life at times, and I never wanted to fail them, and I never intended to, and I had intended to do my best. And things happen, and stuff shifts, and you get stuck, and you're not the person you thought you were going to be. Am I alone? And we betray the trust of another person too. So I don't know which side hits you worse. Doesn't matter, because there's only one person who can free you and will free you from the bitterness of betrayal. And you cannot ask a pastor, a teacher, some person who's esteemed to explain everything to you in detail. They can't do it. No human can give you the answer you really need. It has to come from the heart of God to you. He has to open your eyes and the eyes of your heart. But I would submit, if you're dealing with the bitterness of betrayal, tonight's the night to ask God to set you free by letting you see how Jesus took the bitterness of betrayal for you. And let him reveal himself to you. Because no human's going to be that person for you. Certainly not me. But I point you, like you do to others, I point you to the one who willingly took anything and everything we've all been through for this purpose, to free us from the inside out. The bitterness of betrayal. Well, there is an antidote also given to us in the Passover to the bitterness of their slavery. And that is charoseth, the mixture that Gail made, and you can grab a piece of matzah and load up with some apples, nuts, cinnamon, honey, raisins, lemon, and grape juice. It's a picture of the mortarless brick, how they took away the straw from their bricks and made them make bricks, but it's also a picture of this land flowing with milk and honey. So feel free to eat that, and if is there some left that's going to be out there, or did we use it up? You might see it on the dinner table later. And you'll be able to finish off this stuff at dinner. As you're doing that, I'm going to tell you something. So there's also a lamb bone on your plate, because the children of Israel will not eat lamb because they do not have a temple to make the Hagigah sacrifice, and they will not eat lamb at Passover until they have a temple. That also includes the egg that probably all this came into being doing this in Babylon perhaps. It's roasted, and it represents the mourning over the loss of the temple and the hope of new life, that the temple will be rebuilt. And there's simply a parsnip that represents all the bitter herbs that are eaten. And we'll have more to say about that when we finish up. This is our last thing before we eat dinner. There's not a prayer said over it, but the Jewish, clinking your glasses and giving a toast is l'chaim, to life. So, l'chaim. All right, so here's what we're going to do. These doors will get open. These two tables will start with the first table, second table, go through that door, go down the food line, come through this door here, back to your seats. And these two tables will start with, doesn't matter which table, somebody, I guess we'll start with the end table. Go out, get your food, come around and go back like this, because trying to come through this doorway will be hard. You have to go down the hall and come back, and you guys stay to this side as you're going on that way. Do you get what I'm saying? You stay to your left. These guys go around and come, and they'll stay to their left. And if you see something on somebody's plate you didn't get, just pick it off of there, because it's family. It's all the same food. So, Father, we pray your blessing on this meal, and we thank you for all those who worked so hard to help us have this moment. In Jesus' name, amen.